All right, and I'm going to go back to sharing my screen, and then we'll just start with some FFmpeg stuff. Also, it started getting warmer in New York, and I'm going to prop up my computer just so I get a little bit more airflow underneath it. All right. So schedule for this week is, or schedule for the class at least is, this week we're going to look at some basic stuff. So we'll be looking at like, how to convert a video, how to convert a video into individual sequence frames, those sort of things. We'll look at some cropping, some rotating, some pretty basic stuff that probably everyone has either done or tried to do in FFmpeg, and we'll talk about how each of those works. From there, we'll sort of like just jump into some of the bigger, more expansive stuff. So the place we'll start is we'll look at video filters. So video filters are sort of like the most important part of doing anything complicated in FFmpeg. And then beyond that are what are called complex filters. Complex filters allow you to do a lot more sort of sequencing of different effects. Basically, you can think about complex filters as like, I want to do more than one video filter in an order, and that's what a complex filter is. So we'll talk about that way more next week. We'll look at an example or two this week of how to do that, but we'll really dive in deep next week. In week 3, I'm thinking we'll cover a tool called FFmpeg Python. That is a sort of like more Python-based version of using FFmpeg. So basically, it makes the syntax a lot clearer or a lot more Python-y. That might not be the full class. I'll sort of see where it ends up. One of the challenges with FFmpeg Python is it doesn't cover everything you want to do with FFmpeg. So it's sort of like, I think it'll be a good thing to look at, but it might not be for everyone. And then we'll look at that. So, and then week 4, as I mentioned, I'm going to leave this sort of open. So if people have questions, this might be a good place to look at some stuff like FFplay, which I believe is like a live streaming tool with FFmpeg. So we'll just sort of like, we'll sort of see how class goes. Sometimes some of the stuff will take longer and we'll want to like sort of push things into the next week. As I mentioned, this could probably be a 10-week class after having gone through all the materials. There's a lot in here. So we can look at things and try to figure out what makes the most sense each week. And then if we want to cover stuff in the last week, we can. If you've taken a class with me before, one of the things we like to do is we like to do a show and tell, which is basically just people get to show their work for 5 or 10 minutes. We'll usually do it on YouTube live stream or something. So I find it's a nice little kick in the butt to also make some things. So if you're kind of like dragging your feet, like, I don't really want to make stuff this week, it's nice to sort of be reminded like, hey, we can make stuff and then we'll present it. So usually around week 3 or 4, I'll send out a survey just to sort of see when people want to do that. Usually it's 2 or 3 weeks after class. That way people have a little bit of time to play with all the material and make some things. And these are pretty low key. They're like very optional. 1, you don't have to do them. 2, you can just record a video and I can present that over a streaming service. If you want to do it live, you're more than welcome to. So it's very low key. It is not meant to be like some like final thesis project. Just like, here's the thing I made. Here's the thing I struggled with. I wish I could have learned more about this, et cetera, et cetera. So don't feel like there's a whole bunch of pressure to work on this, but we will talk about when we want to do that at a later date. So structure for class will mostly be, I usually try to make my classes an hour and a half long, and then I find that I'm rushing the last 10 minutes. So I've now made the classes 2 hours long. That way we've got a little bit of overflow to cover the material. And I think it also is nice to have a little bit of question and answer time afterwards. So if you'll want to stick around for 10 or 15 minutes after, we can do questions. I do have sort of a harder stop around 2:05, 2:10 for this class. So we'll also be setting up co-working sessions. So co-working sessions are just open time, usually for about an hour every week, where people can come and join and ask questions, get help with things. Maybe they have a specific idea they want to work through. Those are again optional. They're sort of just open time to have time with me or with other folks. Some people just join them and just like listen in and don't really have anything to discuss, but they just want to hear what other people are talking about. I might play with recording those sessions and sharing them just with this group. So we'll sort of see. I might just ask people day to day if they feel comfortable with me recording that. Again, those should feel like low key times just to chat and work through projects together. So if what I would recommend is maybe during our break today, if you could, click this link for the survey and just fill it out. Just let me know what time works best for you. That way, um, you know, I can try to make sure that our times are best for like the largest part of the group. If whatever, for whatever reason, the time doesn't work for you, there's always time for you to just DM me over Slack and we can just set up time to chat. Um, I also have some other times with one of my other classes I'm doing right now, and depending on how those work out, I might also offer those times to other people as well. So if whatever, for whatever reason, what time we choose for the co-working session doesn't work for you, let me know and I can optionally let you into those times and we can try to find time to work together. But yeah, basically like as you've seen, I've sort of broken these classes into like a live session and an audit session. The audit session is people can only talk to me over Slack. The live session is, we interact one-on-one either through this class or through the co-working sessions. So I want to make sure you get your value for your money. So we'll make sure that we find time to chat over Zoom whenever we can. So materials for the site. So there is a class site. It's just a Google Doc. It's linked to in our Slack channel at the very top. Every week I'll just like say, hey, I updated this with the latest, link to video, link to slides, and then any things that come up during class I'll link to as well. So slides and recordings, you'll get slides day of. They're already linked to from our class site. Recordings will usually be up the next day. It just like Zoom processes them. I upload them to YouTube. That takes a couple hours. And then once that's done, I'll link to it. So I'll let people know when the recordings are up. I do find that I run through stuff pretty quickly in this class. So what people will often do is they'll follow along as close as they can during the course, during the live session, but they'll usually use the video to watch afterward, right? They'll pause it, be like, okay, what did he do here? Okay, like I need to edit this. Or you can watch it at, I know I talk fast, you can watch it at half speed, those sort of things. So recordings I definitely recommend rewatching the recording every week just so it sort of like sinks in a little bit more. Slack, so we do have a Slack channel. If you're not in it already, but basically there's a Slack there. I think I sent this out over email. You have to click to sign up. If you're not in the Slack channel, the FFMPEG art channel, just DM me over break and I can make sure you get added to it. Sometimes people sign in with names I don't recognize and I have to figure out like who they are. Just DM me and I can get you added to it if you're not already in there. So I recommend like once you get in, saying hello and like probably some links to your social media, just because people like to see who you are and usually follow other artists just so they can see what people are making. So you're always welcome to DM me over Slack. You can try to email me. I am very bad at email, so I recommend DMing me first, and that's more likely to get a quicker response from me. I just generally do better with Slack because my email is kind of a nightmare. One other thing that I want to mention is I would generally recommend that unless it's like about billing or like some other issue, if it's just a question about class material, post it in our Slack channel rather than DMing me. The reason for that is that if you have that question, likely someone else does, and likely someone else is embarrassed or like doesn't want to post it because they think that makes them look stupid. So post it in Slack because I guarantee you like me answering it there will be more helpful for people. I should say, please don't ever feel embarrassed about asking questions. FFmpeg is a very obtuse format and it can be very confusing. So please ask questions whenever you can, either here or in Slack. Totally fine. Like, do not worry about looking stupid because I promise you can't. All right, so objectives for this class. I think this matched up with what everyone was already saying that they wanted to learn, which is great. Mostly what I want to get out of this class is that people can you don't feel like you have to just go and Google something. Now you can actually like understand what's actually going on under the hood of FFmpeg, right? Like all of us have done it. We've all been like, FFmpeg, how do I do X? And like you find a Stack Overflow that has 10 different people saying 10 different things and they fight with each other and you're like, I don't know which one of these is right. So the hope of this class is like we'll actually begin to break down all the commands and understand what they do. Now, honestly, I don't understand every FFmpeg command. I don't expect anyone else to. So there will still be some copying and pasting. That's just part of, I think, the FFmpeg like life. One of the things that's nice is we're going to use Colab notebooks, which means all of the commands will be saved into those notebooks. So you can always reference those notebooks as well as some documentation and like copy and paste from there. So we can remove ourselves from the Stack Overflow world of people being really rude to each other. That's my hope, at least, on some level. So I do want to create some video art, right? So like FFmpeg as a course is generally about like, well, how do I create the right compression levels, or how do I crop a video, or how do I convert a video from this format to this format? I want to sort of explore what we can do beyond just that sort of thing into like really using the FFmpeg tool as a video art tool. And I think there's some cool options that we can do with that. I think one of the most powerful parts of FFmpeg that I very rarely see discussed is the complex filter, which is basically like using like a chaining process within FFmpeg. So I think there's a lot of power to generate some really cool scripts that can use that to generate really interesting video pieces. So we will definitely cover a lot of that over the next couple weeks. And as a couple of you mentioned, it would be nice to be able to automate some of this stuff. So one of the challenges with FFmpeg is it is sort of like a scripting tool. There aren't a lot of ways to pass in variables, although there actually are a lot of variables built into the program, which we'll look at some today, and we'll look at a lot more next week. So it's nice to be able to use something like Python or some other bash scripting tool on top of this. So one of the reasons we're going to use Colab is that Colab can mix and match both Python and bash together, which can be a little confusing at first, but once you get the hang of it, it feels really powerful. So we'll look at that in the next couple weeks, and I think we'll have some fun doing that. And you could basically then build in like some sort of scripting process where all you have to do is feed a video input and you get some really cool videos out. So we'll look at that over the next couple weeks as well. So software for this class will be obviously Slack and then Google Colab. I sent out some links to some Colab courses I've taught before. I would say you don't really need to worry about that too much for this class because we won't really be doing any machine learning stuff in this course. So we'll be concerned a little bit less with Colab as like a interface that we need to like send stuff back and forth between various things. Diego, go ahead.
I have a question. Is in my terminal I have CSH and you are talking about bash. I know that there's a difference. They're not the same.
They're not the same, but that'll basically work. So FFmpeg isn't really bash. It's just like it's a command line tool. So we'll also talk about this maybe in the last week class. Like if you wanted to take these commands out of Colab and bring them into your terminal, it's actually fairly easy to do. One of the challenges is you won't be able to use sort of the Python scripting environment within that, but we'll definitely look at that. So what I'd recommend for people is like, if you're cool with it, try just using Colab for the first couple weeks, and then around maybe week 3 or 4, we'll look at how to be able to do that directly in terminal.
Okay.
Yep. And I should say, like, if you are a conscientious objector to the Google monolith, there are ways to take these out of Colab and use them wherever you are. I'd probably recommend just trying Colab for a little bit, just because it's going to help like sort of document a lot of these tools. But I'm also very happy to talk with people about how to bring these directly into the command line if you're interested. That's probably a great thing to talk about during a co-working session or over Slack. So especially when we get into some stuff where we're trying to use Python, Python plus FFmpeg gets a little gnarly outside of Colab because you have to sort of run a lot of weird commands and things in Python to get it to work. But we could. So we can look at that together and sort of see how that goes. So also, I just want to recommend that part of the challenge of this class is that because we are rendering video can take a lot of time. So I recommend if you're going to follow along in class, that one of the things you do is find a really short video clip, say like 4 to 8 seconds, and use that. One of the other annoying parts of Colab is you kind of need to download every video directly from Colab. Playing video in Colab is really annoying and very slow. So this is going to be one of those cases where having um, a really short video just to quickly render it, download it, and view it is going to be really helpful. Obviously, outside of the live class, like outside of us doing demos and tutorials, you can use any sort of length of video you want. This will work with hour-long, 2-hour-long videos, as long as you're willing to wait for it to render out. So just beware of that, but I recommend like something really short. Another thing that I have fun with is just using really short looping video clips. Like that tends to work really nicely, because then anything you do does loop again, and then you can post it to Instagram, and it's really, really short, but it looks like it's really long because of the looping structure. So again, I'll be using like a 4-second video, which in most cases is fine. There might be a couple little issues here or there with that length, but I'll try to warn people about that. So I'll move through stuff very quickly. Again, I would recommend, try to follow along if you want to, but if you don't want to follow along, my recommendation would be to like watch the video later this week, and pause and play it slower, those sort of things to follow along. So sort of up to you. If I do go too fast, like regardless of what I'm doing, even in the recordings, just let me know and we can try to slow it down. I always have a desire to add as much content into the class as possible, but that always can sometimes lead to a thing where it's like just confusing because I'm trying to cram too much stuff in. So I will try to slow down and make sure we cover stuff at a pace that everyone's comfortable with. And lastly, I should say, like, this is a very much like a group experiment. I have spent maybe the past couple months really digging into FFmpeg more, but that doesn't mean that I am by any means an expert. So my guess is that because some of us have coding skills in here, and because some of us, understand other tools or just have good knowledge about stuff, you're going to find things that I haven't explored yet. And I think that should be encouraged. And I would love to see people post that stuff to Slack. If you find a cool FFmpeg command that we don't cover, like please, by all means, like make a note of it, add it to a Colab notebook and share it with people. This is really going to be a class where we kind of as a group sort of learn our way through FFmpeg, and it's like group therapy. We're going to figure out how the coding commands and everything together as a group. All right. Any questions about logistics before I jump into a little bit of lecture? All right. Oh, Tom, go for it.
Just a quick question as I'm moving through my video files, is MP4, MOV, MKV, what's the best file to use?
Yeah, the nice thing is, and we'll look at this in just a minute, FFmpeg doesn't care. Like FFmpeg is like very, very smart, and sometimes shockingly smart, and that it can read in lots of formats. We'll look at one thing, which is a little trick. So one other thing that I might recommend, which I should have added, maybe I'll add this to my notes. I'm gonna make a note for myself. You might want to download a tool called VLC. VLC is a video app. The nice thing about VLC is that it reads pretty much any format of video. If you use QuickTime on a Mac, there's a very particular format you need to produce your video in, which I will show in this class this week. But VLC will pretty much open anything, which is kind of nice. So a lot of the commands I will be doing in this class will kind of skip the QuickTime formatting. Yeah, Handbrake is also a good one. Handbrake is more about converting. So like as long as we've got VLC, we'll be able to watch any video we want. But yeah, both those tools are like definitely, if you've done any video stuff, you'll want to download those tools just to play with them. Yeah, so we'll look at that. But the nice thing is, yeah, FFmpeg is sort of like VLC for the command line in that it can really read any format and convert to any format. So you're pretty much good there. Cool. Any other questions? All right. So let's jump into FFmpeg. So it sounded like everyone had the exact same experience that I have, which is that you find this tool called FFmpeg. You see some very like verbose or like very, I guess it's terse, but very confusing command. And you Google it to figure out what it is. And then you're like in Google hell where there's just so many commands and you don't know what all of them do. And part of the challenge here is that like there's also many ways to do the same thing in FFmpeg. So we'll look at a couple examples of that today. But I do recommend using Google and just sort of seeing what other people do, and then seeing if you can break that down and understand it in ways we're talking about in this class. It's one of the challenges that you'll find more often than not. There's a way to do a thing using a video filter. There's a way to do a thing outside of the video filter, and they have slightly different trade-offs. But in the most part, like there are multiple ways to do multiple things, which is very confusing. I FFmpeg is a very, very powerful tool. It's very cool, but it is confusing. And part of my hope for this class is to break it down so it's less confusing. I'm not going to promise that it's completely clear by the end of this class, but I am going to say that it's hopefully less confusing for everyone. So as an example, here is a FFmpeg command. I don't expect anyone to be able to read this, but what this does is it takes in a single video and it produces a video that looks like this. And so you can probably imagine what it does is it takes in a single video. It does some scaling, it does some overlay like repositioning, and then it allows for us to change hue levels as we go through this. So by the end of this class, you will be able to read this command, and honestly, you should be able to know what this does. So that's my hope for this, is that you'll be able to read through this and be like, you might need to break it down. Like you might need to cut and paste these things into like, okay, what does this command do? What does this command do? But the hope is that you will be able to use something like this and build up something like this yourself. Hopefully, actually, maybe even by next week, you'll be able to do this. We'll start by breaking down this into like its core components, and then we'll go through a step by step how to rebuild this. So you may be asking, maybe you're not asking, maybe you already know the answer to this, but like, I think a lot of people are like, well, why would I use this over some like After Effects or Final Cut or a coding tool like Processing or Open Frameworks or quite honestly anything else, right? Like if that code looks scary to you, why would you even want to get into it? And this is sort of just like how I approach things, but like, or this is how I approach some of my coding art, is I find constraints really, really cool. I think constraints help us sort of like think about how we make stuff in a more constrained environment. And while FFmpeg, like there are lots of opportunities to do lots of cool things, it's not like a manipulable tool like After Effects or something. So you have to sort of think more programmatically. And I think those constraints allow us to sort of think about how we might begin to create algorithms or create scripts to generate these things. I also like using this class, or I want to use this class as just a way to like learn FFmpeg. So even if you don't do any video art stuff with this, you at least like learn how FFmpeg works and can then do stuff like, okay, at my day job, I need to take a video and convert it to 5 different formats, or I need to like learn how to like convert one video format to another because it's what's been requested of me of a gallery or something. So we will still learn lots of the workflow tools side of FFmpeg, but I think we'll also have some fun with some of the art side of things as well. And lastly, when I started to investigate this, I found that no one else was teaching anything like this, which means I have to do it. So it's like just one of those things that like, if it doesn't exist, we have to do it. So that's part of the fun of this class. And I do actually think like this will be a very fun and interesting class. And like, again, I don't really see anyone teaching this, so I'm really hopeful that people get a lot of fun and excitement out of it. All right, so back to FFmpeg. This is going to sound really simple, but FFmpeg is really just 3 things. There is an input, and you can input multiple files. So you can input video, images, audio. It basically just takes in any form of input that is a graphic or a video. And we'll look at today. I think we'll look at mostly single inputs, but we will eventually look at multiple inputs to a script as well. Second is transformations. Then this is really where lots of people get lost. This is where it gets very confusing. Is you're doing some sort of transformation, right? You're saying change the frame rate, crop the video, change the hue level, any other number of things. So transformations are really what we're going to look at for the most of this class. But sometimes the command itself looks really confusing because what you're really doing is you're breaking a bunch of stuff into transformations. And then lastly, there's outputs, right? So, you can think of this as like just a pipe where there's an input, you do something with that, and then you output it. And outputs, again, are video, images, audio. So if we want to draw this, like the thing is basically like this, right? Now, what we'll start to look at probably past this week, or actually toward the end of this week, is something that's more like this, which is that even inside of this transformations, you've got sort of this node-based model where you are doing inputs in your transformation. You're doing a mini transformation inside of that. You get an output from there, and then you take that output and put it back into your transformation, right? So there's sort of a loop inside of this. And this, like, so if you were to go and break down that that video I showed at the beginning, that's essentially what we're doing here. We're taking a single video in, we're sort of forking it into multiple processes, and then we're recombining them at the end. So if you used any node-based editor like Touch Designer or Max or those sort of things, like basically this is just a command line version of that, right? So you take a single node, you break it up into a couple different pieces, and then you recombine it at the end. That's essentially what FFmpeg is. It's just all done through command line. So if we take this, this crazy command here again, and we break this down to pieces, the first part is you always have to start your command with FFmpeg. That just tells the command line that that's what you're using. The next piece is your input. So you will always see -i before any input. So even when you do multiple inputs, you'll do -i video file, -i audio file, -i graphic image. So we'll look at a couple of this a little bit toward the end of class, but essentially these are how you say I have inputs. I'm going to skip over the transformation. We'll come back to it. The last part is at the output. So the output is, there's no -o or anything, so this is also where it can kind of get confusing. You just say like, here's the file name I want. And one of the things that's cool about this is you can just sort of say .mp4, and FFmpeg figures out what the format is. You could say .avi or .mkv, and FFmpeg under the hood just sort of is like, cool, I know what to do with this. You also say .png, and we'll look at an example of that where if you want a single static frame out of your video, you can do that as well. So that's the simple part. The complex part is this, right? What are we doing with our transformations? So there'll be stuff like you'll see -vf or -v :filter or -video filter, video underscore filter. You'll see -filter underscore complex. There's a bunch of commands, and we'll go through a bunch of them today. But this is sort of what's really happening here. And maybe even by the end of class, I'll be able to describe a little bit about what's going on with these bracketed things. But this is essentially like, anytime you see an FFmpeg command, you want to start to break it into these pieces. And then usually what you'll do is you'll take all the stuff in the middle and be like, okay, what's all the stuff in the middle doing? And that's essentially how you want to sort of like begin to read FFmpeg. So there is documentation for FFmpeg. There is this page, which I believe is, the URL is literally ffmpeg-all. This is literally every single command that you can use in FFmpeg. I don't recommend trying to read this start to finish, but it exists. So if you are interested in like, what the hell does this command do? Like, let's say we'll look at random really quickly today. So let's say you want to look at random. You can search for random here on this page, click here, and it will say, here's how random works. Now, some of this is well documented. This I would say is so-so documented. Other things are really well documented, and once you've like learned a little bit of the syntax, you'll be able to understand what's going on. So for example, they also have tutorials. Like there's a tutorial on video encoding. So there are options. In some cases, there are things that are really well documented and they explain everything. That is not the norm. That is like a very, you're lucky if you find that. So a lot of stuff is, I would say, just, like most open source software, poorly documented, half documented, contains a couple variables, but you don't know what to do with it. So hopefully part of this class will be like, we can read through some stuff and we can figure out what's going on, break it down together, that sort of thing. All right, so that's sort of the basics of FFmpeg that I want to talk about today. It'll all sort of make sense when we actually go through the notebook. So that's what we're going to do now. So we're going to take 5 minutes. I'm just going to do a 5-minute intro to Colab. Then we're going to take a break. So we'll do a 5-minute intro to Colab. We'll maybe let everyone sort of generate a single video during the break, and then we'll come back and really dive into FFmpeg. So I'll copy this link into our chat. If you have a Google account, I believe this should open directly in a Colab interface for you. If it doesn't, let me know. But hopefully this like opens directly into Colab for you. And this is linked from the slide deck, so you can always open this, and this page will always open for you. It should just be editable and shareable. So this is what the Colab interface looks like. If you've never used a Python notebook before, it can start to feel a little weird at first, but after that, it will start to we'll be able to break this down into a little bit of an easier way of working. So the nice thing about Colab is it's part text and part code. So the nice thing about these notebooks is hopefully I've documented them well. So you can sort of read through a lot of the text here, and then you can run the cell below it. So usually when you will come to a notebook for the first time, let me just crash this here. Your notebook up here at the top right will say connect or reconnect. Clicking this button starts up a server that Google runs behind the scenes. So this will just start up, just fires up like a normal GCP instance. So I would recommend the first thing you do is come in here, and actually the first thing you should do that I would probably recommend is go to File and go to Save a Copy in Drive. So what this will do is it will save a copy of this notebook in Drive for you, and then you can make any edits you want to. And I do recommend if there's something that I'm saying that is confusing to you and you want to reword some of these phrases in a different way so that you remember, you can do that. We might make some edits to this notebook and I might resave it. And if I do that, I'll let people know like, hey, I've resaved this and you should reopen this one. But saving a copy is just a good thing to do because then you've got access to it. And then you can always come to colab.research.google.com. When you come here, you'll get an interface that just says, hey, do you want to open a notebook you've previously used? So you can open up your old notebook from there. Along the right-hand side here are a couple things I should recommend. So the first is table of contents. So all of this uses Markdown. So we've marked down, so Chris's question is, should we save a copy and go work on our copy? It's kind of up to you. I think it's probably fine if you just save a copy now. I don't think we'll be making too many edits to this. But you can also work directly in, one of the challenges, you can work directly in this notebook. The problem is you can't save this notebook. So if you make changes to it, you'll have to duplicate it and save out that duplicate of it. Okay, so along the left-hand side here is like basically a table of contents. Some of these notebooks get really long, and you might open them and be like, I just want to jump to the command that said how to do scaling. So this table of contents here will just let you jump around. So I find this very helpful when I'm going back to old notebooks and I'm like, I just wanted this command. So you can sort of see the document tree here. Next, which is also really important, is the folder command. This is where we're going to upload and download files from. So if you click the File tab here, if you're not connected to a runtime, it's going to start to auto-connect your runtime. Colab is kind of funky in the way that this file area works. This is actually a folder in the base of the GCP instance. So we'll look at how to copy the paths and that sort of thing really quickly here. One thing I recommend not doing is don't hit this up button. This up button is going to send you into the base folder of your GCP instance, and you'll be very confused. So if you do, I'm just going to show you what it looks like. If you hit this button, you'll look into a place like this, and you'll be like, where the hell am I? All of your files are going to be here in the content folder. So if you do hit this button and you end up at a place that looks like this, just know everything that you will look for is going to be in content. I'm actually going to restart my runtime because I don't want to do this because it can be very confusing. And I should say, if for whatever reason you end up in a place where you're like, I think I'm breaking something and I don't know what to do, runtime is a helpful command. And if you just want to restart from scratch, just obliterate my server and start over, do factory reset runtime. One thing to note about factory reset runtime is if you hit this, it will delete any files you've uploaded or generated in Colab. So make sure you download anything you want before hitting this. Just be aware, because you can lose a lot of work if you hit this. Because Colab is also connected to the internet, it's basically working off a server. If your Wi-Fi goes down for say 5 to 10 minutes, usually around 10 to 20 minutes, this will disconnect. So I do recommend saving often and downloading often as you work. There's some other tricks and tools that probably some people in here know about, connecting to a Google Drive account, saving files directly to Drive so this doesn't happen. If anyone's interested in that, I'll talk about that maybe in a co-working session. But for today, we'll mostly be working with short video files, so we'll be able to upload and download really quickly. So I've restarted my runtime, so I'm just going to go back over here and hit reconnect. All right, so before we take a break, let's look at just doing one really simple thing. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to upload a video. Now, there's a couple ways to do this. The common way is just to take a video file from your computer and drag it into this area. So that's what I'm going to do. So I'm just going to go to my Finder. I have a video already here that I wanted to use. So I just have oops, where is it? Here we go. So I have a short little video. It's about 4 seconds. And it loops, so I'm just going to use that. So I'm just going to take this and drag this into Colab. Now, one thing it just reminds you is hey, if you restart your notebook or whatever, you're going to lose these files. So just be aware of that. And as this uploads, you'll see it's it uploads a little bit. If you have a long file for a later date, I highly recommend that what you actually do is upload it to Drive, and then clicking this button will launch a code cell that allows you to mount your Google Drive account. Uploading and downloading for Google Drive, for a reason, is faster than Colab. I assume Google is doing some funky stuff on their side, so you may find that that's faster. Again, for this class, we'll keep the video short, so it should be a little bit easier to do this. All right, so while this uploads, let's talk a little bit about how Colab works. So Colab has text cells and code cells. A text cell is just Markdown. So if you double click into this space, you can edit this text. And this is just pure Markdown. There's some WYSIWYG tools here as well. If you click out of there, it's just going to convert it back to the text format. So that's pretty much it for text cells. And then your next thing is a code cell. So a code cell literally runs code. So this is essentially a command line that runs inside of an interface. One thing to note is that if you have a command line line of code that you're going to run, you want to preface it with a exclamation point. So that just says run a command line line of code versus Python. So we'll use Python and we will just write Python directly in these cells. So if you ever want to convert one of these to a command line script using your local command line, all you have to do is copy this code and just exclude the exclamation point. Now, pathing will probably be different and other things will probably be different, but if you do want to do that, you can do that from here. So now that my video is uploaded, what I'm going to do is I'm going to right-click either the ellipses or control-click on the file name, and I'm going to copy path. That's just going to copy the path that it is on the server. And then what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take this command here. So this is just going to be a fun little command we're just going to play with during the break, and then we'll come back and we'll explain everything that's going on here. So because this is the input, right, I want to take my input video, and I'm just going to change the path to this. So we'll take this and I'll paste this. Now it's going to be the exact same command because my file name and things are the same. Yours may be different. We're just going to paste this path in. So what we're going to do is we're going to say take this video and run this video filter on it. You can skip this stuff for now. This is basically to make sure it is legible or readable in QuickTime. And then we're going to output the video back to this folder, which is /content, with the name random X. So this is a random filter. What it's going to do is it's going to take our video and it's going to shuffle all of the frames around. And then it's going to re-output the video. So it'll get kind of glitchy and weird. So there's two things to play with during your break. So the first is this first number is how many frames should it shuffle between? So if you set this to a smaller number, like say 5 or 10, it's going to shuffle within a very short sequence. If you make it really big, it's going to shuffle a larger sequence. So this will kind of control the glitchiness. And then seed is a random seed generator. So if you set the same frame count here and your seed is the same number, you'll get the exact same video out. So if you want to play with this number and then also play with the seed, you'll get different variables. So once you've got this set up, all you need to do to run this command is either press the play button here or click in the cell and press shift return. And so if I just hit play here, it's going to say, this notebook's run by GitHub. Are you okay with this? Nothing is malicious in this code, so you can go ahead and hit yes. All right, so this is going to spit out a video. So if you ever run FFmpeg from the command line, you've probably seen all of this get dumped out as well. I have no idea what 90% of this does. I don't worry about it. All I look for is a big red error message, which I usually don't get. But you'll see here that what has happened is we've started to create, it's created a file here called random100, and that's because of this name. You'll see I probably should have changed it a little bit because I've got 10 instead of 100. So it's now random 10. So this outputted a file here, right? So if I scroll down here, you'll see I didn't get any error messages, so that seems to be good. My play button, when it plays, it's got like that little like animating thing around it, has stopped, which means it's done processing. So now I've got this video here, and I can go ahead and click, right-click on the file and go download. This is usually what I do because trying to play video directly in Colab is very slow. So I find just downloading stuff is a little bit faster. And with me using Zoom, and this is why you want to make your file pretty small, because if this is, you know, a 30-minute video, this might be 500 megabytes and it's going to take forever to download. So for the demos in this class, I recommend keeping it short. Come on. So also sometimes that little like Colab is kind of a new thing that Google has been playing with for the past year or two. It's a very small team that builds it, and there's some bugs here and there. Like you'll notice that my video thing disappeared, and I don't know if that means it actually crashed or if it just like has sort of hidden. So we'll go ahead and download this video again. Let's see if it works. So at this point, we can let's take like a 7-minute break. So what I recommend doing is just maybe generating a couple videos and just playing with these and seeing what you get. So again, you'll just want to play with these two numbers. And you may want to change, every time you change out the file, you may want to change out the name of your file just to generate multiple pieces. So why don't we do this? If you make a cool video and you want to post it to Slack, that's great. So why don't we take a 7-minute break? So we'll come back at 15 minutes after, and we'll dive into the rest of FFmpeg and maybe break down this command a little bit more. So we'll see everyone in 7-ish minutes. So unfortunately, random doesn't have an audio equivalent to it. So this is one of the things we'll run into fairly commonly, which is like, how do you process something on the video side, but also do the exact same thing in the audio side? And quite often they don't have a similar filter, which can be really annoying. So I think for the first couple weeks of this class, we'll mostly deal with video filters. We'll come back maybe in week 3 or week 4 and look at how to do the audio processes. But yeah, one of the challenges is like these things don't sync up in the way you might expect them to, or like sometimes FFmpeg is smarter than I expect and sometimes it's dumber than I expect. And it can be hard to figure out which one of those is which. So I see a couple other people posted fun videos. So definitely recommend checking out those videos and seeing what happens. Yeah. Any questions before we jump back into FFmpeg as a whole? Okay. Sorry, Chris, were you going to say something?
I was just gonna. I think you're gonna cover it anyway, but I'm a little bit unclear on exactly what that random frames number is gonna do. But I feel like that's the breakdown you're about to cover.
So I'm actually not going to cover that, but and quite honestly, I also maybe don't know. So I think what it does is I think that frames count takes the number of frames in like a sequence and it shuffles them. So it'll do batches essentially. So it'll do a batch of 10 frames and shuffle those, and it'll do the next batch of 10 frames, shuffle those, the next batch of 10 frames and shuffle those. And all it does is it shuffles the frame order and then it reproduces the video from there. I think that's what happens. Again, like these things are fairly, we could probably dig into the documentation and maybe understand a little bit more, but that's what I understand from the documentation of this. Yeah. Which is why the longer your frame count is, the more bounces you get because it's got a longer sequence that it's looking at to shuffle.
Yeah, but there still seemed to be some forward motion through the.
Yeah, so that's what I'm not unclear about is like, is it doing it in a sequenced order or like, yeah, I'm not, it's like not very clear, and also the documentation isn't particularly great with that either. So one of the challenges of FFmpeg. This is a great little sample because it shows you the power and like the confusion of these tools. All right, so let's dig into just like FFmpeg as a whole. So I'm actually going to skip over this section just because I am worried a little bit about time. If you want to grab a video from YouTube, this is a really cool, if you've ever played with YouTube download, you can use this to download videos. So the first thing you'll do is you'll run this cell, which just installs YouTube DL. And then to use YouTube DL, you just give it exclamation point YouTube DL, and then you pass it a path to a video. And then this, if you do -O, that'll change the name of the output file. So in previous, sometimes usually what I do is I just like grab a video from my own YouTube channel and just start to play with that. So if you are interested in using this, we can cover this more in a co-working session. But just be aware that like you can also just grab video directly from YouTube if you want to play with stuff there. So instead of uploading it, you can just download from YouTube. There's a bunch of different ways to get video into Colab, and this is just one of them. All right. So I'll skip that for now, and we'll come back to input output. So let's like back up a little bit and just sort of like talking about sort of like how this thing works. So again, we talked about input and output, and basically the way this works is that you can feed you feed in a video file, right? So this could be any video file. So we can actually just take this video, and you can paste in this path. Now these paths have to be relative to wherever you are, which is why I kind of like doing this in Colab, because we don't have to worry about where we are in the command line. We don't worry about where we're located. Pretty much in this class, almost always in Colab, we will be in the content folder. So it'll always be /content/ whatever the name of your file is. And then output, again, takes a path. So in most cases, you'll want to save it back to where you are. And what's really interesting about FFmpeg is like you could do stuff with this, right? So let's say you want to convert your MP4 to an AVI file. You could literally just change this to AVI, and this you can run. So we could run this, and it will literally just convert our MP4 to AVI. Now, in reality, we probably want more control than that, or like we want to do things. But if someone's just like, hey, can you just quickly send me an AVI of this? Like this works. And you'll see when I refresh this, I now have an AVI file. This works with like MKVs as well. So it probably works with any number of formats. I'm sure there's some weird stuff that FFmpeg might not work with, but for the most part, it works fine. So this is literally just saying, take this video as an input and output it. And it's pretty smart. It can understand the formatting of this fairly well. So that's input and output. So that's like the basics of what we're going to do. But obviously this isn't everything you want, right? So let's take a look at a couple other like really cool, quick things to do. So something I very commonly do, if you've ever taken any machine learning classes, is that we take a video and we split it into frames. And the way to do that command is to do take your input video and then output as a .png or a .jpeg. And the next thing you need to do is you need to give it some sort of like sort of command about how to deal with multiple inputs, right? So if you want to output a series of video or a series of frames from a video, if you give it just this name of test.png, it's just going to constantly overwrite itself, right? You don't really want to do that. So what you do is you use this command, which is like sort of a syntax for numbers. So %09d says I want an integer number, so that means 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and it should have it should have 9. It should be 9 numbers long. So if you run this, the very first frame will be 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 1. Or sorry, I guess there was one less 0 there. I did 10 instead of 9. So this will convert to a 9 length number. One thing to note is that if you don't already have the folder that you're dumping it to, I think this will throw an error message or it just won't save it out. So this command above is Python, and this will just create a folder called frames for me. So I'm just going to run this command. And if I come over here and I hit this refresh, it's going to refresh, and you'll see now I have an empty folder called frames. So now what I want to do is I want to take my test video and I want to convert them all to PNGs, and I want to just call it test dash and then whatever number sequence it is. So I'll run this cell. And sorry, I often do shift return to run the cell. So if you don't see me hit the play button, just know I'm hitting the play button by hitting shift return. And if I look inside my frames folder, you'll see it started to generate all my frames. So there's only 42 frames in this entire video. So you'll see 0001 all the way down to 0042. Now, if for whatever reason I want to make this shorter, you can change this number by changing this digit count. So this would be only 3 digits. So it'd be 001, 002. You could do any number of things here with this. So like it could be, I think it could be 20. I wouldn't recommend doing that. Almost no one has a video that long, and it's not worth doing that. I think 09 tends to be what a lot of people default to because it just will work for pretty much any video format. So what's interesting here is we were able to take up MP4 and we were able to take up PNG, and it just sort of knew what we were doing, right? It just sort of said like, okay, you just want to convert that to a bunch of frames. Fine, I can do that. You could change this to JPG. It will output as JPEGs. One thing I'm not sure about is what the default quality of a JPEG is. I feel like it's not the best, but you could play with that and see. I tend to do PNGs just because I know then it's going to be like decent lossless quality. So what if we want to do the reverse? Oh, actually, so here's one thing. So right now it's grabbing every single frame, right? So it's taking every frame from our video. A lot of times it's going to produce a ton of video, and you don't really want that. So one thing you might want to do is like, let me just say like, I just want to take a frame every second. So I just want to be able to show like very quickly what this video looks like, maybe upload those as thumbnails. So let's create another folder and we'll call it frames-r1. And if I refresh here, I've got frames r1. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take the exact same command. So we'll take our test input and we'll do our output to this new frame count, to this new folder, frames-r1. And we're going to use -r and then 1. And -r stands for essentially frame rate, or the rate. So this is going to say, what's the rate at which I want to take these frames? For whatever reason, FFmpeg tends to work in seconds. Its format is almost always based in seconds. So this is saying I want to take 1 frame per second. So maybe this video was actually probably produced at 10 frames per second. This would probably be something like what I already did. So if you do 1, that's going to be 1 frame a second. If you do 0.5, that's going to be half. That's going to be 1 frame every 2 seconds. So this is like a really common thing you'll see people do, is just to get a bunch of thumbnails out of this. So if you just run the cell, I should probably only see 4 or 5 frames from here. Okay, so 6. So I think what it does, it takes the first and last, and then it does every frame between there. So this isn't perfect, like it's not going to be exactly match up to this. Also, if you're in Colab and you're like sick of seeing all these like outputs of the console, if you hover over to the left of this and just hit X, it'll delete everything from your console. So that's converting frames, or converting video to frames. What if we want to do the reverse? So this time we want to take our input, and we want our input to be the frames themselves, and then we want to convert that to a video. And this, unsurprisingly, works just the exact opposite. So our input is going to be a PNG with a sequence. So again, we use this sequence. We say we want it in the order of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So you could just take this order in, right? So it's saying this is the order in which I want to read the images in, and here's how I want to output this to a video. So if you're on this cell, it's just going to look at all of our frames here, and it's going to reorder them. And so when this finishes, I should have a video that is the exact same that I output for. So these are just some really common tasks that I do pretty much feel like every day inside of FFmpeg. This one is really, really helpful because this is a great way if you're doing any sort of image sequence thing, either in processing or in other tools, but you don't want it to be real time. So for example, like a lot of times you can just try to do a screen record and you'll find that the frame rate isn't right for whatever you're doing. You can just dump out every iteration that it produces, and then you can use this command, making sure that you're outputting the name to match whatever format you have here. You can just produce a video that way. So I do this pretty much all the time. If you've ever seen any of my videos with machine learning interpolations, this is the command we're using. We're just generating a sequence of stills, and then we're bundling them together into a video. And this also takes a frame rate command. So if you do -R and you do 24, that's going to be 24 frames per second. If you want to do 60 frames per second, it'd be 60, et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of these can be built up in a way that, like, once you understand what a single command does, you can use it in multiple places. All right, so as I mentioned, I highly recommend that you get VLC, because if you download one of these videos that we produced here, QuickTime will probably tell you that it can't read it. And that's because there's this special format of codec that QuickTime is used to is reading. If you ever do want to just produce videos for QuickTime, these are the commands you add. So you add this video codec, which is libx264, and then you do the pix format, which I understand this is like something to do with like how the pixels are formatted in a way, of YUV420p. I honestly have no idea what this means. I just use it all the time, and I know it works in QuickTime. So I will probably not do this because it's just more crap that clutters up the command line. But if you're ever like, hey, I just want this to work for QuickTime, this is where you want to go. So if you're ever like looking for this again, you can just come to this notebook and go click on QuickTime format, and it will show up here. Now, as I mentioned, there's 2 ways to do this, because there's 2 ways or 3 ways to do everything in QuickTime, or sorry, in FFmpeg. The other way is to actually use this as a video format. So if you see -VF or -V:filter or -video_filter, it all means the same thing. It means video filter. So you can pass in the format into the video filter, and it will do the exact same thing. This is where it gets really confusing, right? Because you'll go to Stack Overflow, and someone will say, this is a better format because it does this, or like this requires re-encoding, and you'll be like, I don't know what any of this means. And the truth is, there's usually very slight differences between these, and for most purposes, it doesn't matter. But just to let you know, you will see people often use the video filter for some purpose, or have a direct command of -pix_ format. Another common thing you might see is controlling quality. So you might want to say, like, I want a higher quality version of my video, right? It feels too compressed, or like this file is too big and I want a lower compression rate. The most common way to use that is this CRF command. So if you input -CRF, this will control the what exactly does it stand for?
Constant bit rate, I think.
Yeah, exactly. Constant rate factor. Yes, that's what it stands for. So there's some documentation here. Basically, all you need to know is what you really want to use is a number between 17 and 28. It goes between 0 and 51, but apparently no one uses those ranges. This is FFmpeg in a nutshell. Why have them if no one uses them? But I'm sure 0 looks like total crap, which is maybe fun. So if you want to break some video, I'm sure 0 looks like absolute garbage. 51 is going to create a really, it's probably going to be like lossless, right? I would imagine it's
Inverse,
like,
Derek.
oh, is it
It's
inverse?
the inverse, yeah. I think that's what the page
yes,
said.
you're right. Sorry, yes, you're right. Sorry about that. So again, also why use the inverse? Anyway, so 0 is lossless. 51 is the worst quality. So thank you. God, I'm already giving the wrong information to people. But anyway, this is, so 0 is the best quality. See, my notes are right. I'm just speaking incorrectly. So 0 is the best quality, 51 is the worst. And most people do something between 17 and 28, and the default is 23. So there's lots of reasons why you want lossless. But it's, so basically that's the answer there is, you'll change the value of this to be different things. There's also, if you look at this, there's also a bunch of presets for things. I'm going to skip those. If you want to read through this documentation, I'm happy to sort of like describe these, or like we can look at them in a co-working session. But I feel like we're already spending so much time on compression and things that I wanted to get to the fun stuff for this class. But there is a lot more. This is like the best documentation that you will find in FFmpeg, and it's always about encoding because that's what most people do this for. So if you want to read more about encoding and compression and presets and those sort of things, I definitely recommend reading through this. I'm happy to talk about it if anyone has questions. All right, So let's start looking at some basic video filters. So video filters, as I mentioned, are that transform part of what we do in FFmpeg. And there are just a ton of different options. And I'm going to go through a couple basic ones in this class today. So the first thing we're going to look at is how to do scaling. So obviously scaling is a pretty common thing we're going to want to do, right? We want to scale a video down to save it to, Instagram, or, for whatever reason, maybe uploading it to a certain site. It requires a certain size. So scaling is like kind of a complicated task to do through a command line, right? Because it's like, do I want to scale by a certain aspect ratio? Do I want to actually change the aspect ratio? Do I have a max dimension that I need to match? So there's a couple different things you can do here. So if you're trying to keep the aspect ratio, there's two ways to do this. So first off, the VF filter is, again, the video filter. You might see people do v.filter. I believe you can also see video underscore filter. I think this one might also work. I will often just do VF because I want these commands to be as short as possible, so they're not like 50 lines long. But just know that there's different ways to write this. So VF is a video filter, so it's going to just operate on our video. So there's also an audio filter, which is going to operate on audio. So we're just going to look at scaling the video. Since there's no way, you don't need to scale audio. You don't need to worry about that. So scale. So scale will take in two dimensions. So the first dimension is going to be the width, and the second dimension is going to be the height. And usually what you'll see is you'll see scale equals, and you'll see the first argument and then colon the second argument. I believe there are ways to sort of do scale equals width equals. This looks really funny to me, so I'll generally just leave it as this. But just know the first dimension is width and the second dimension is height. Now, if you just want to say, I just want to set the max dimension on one side or the other, what you can do is set the dimension. So this is going to be 320 wide, and then you can set -1, and FFmpeg will figure out what that dimension needs to be for the height. So this is just going to say, take my video, and whatever the width, I want the width to be this, you figure out the height. So we'll run this. And if I come over here and I download this, I should get a video that is now 320 wide. Yeah, it looks pretty small. It also happens to be square, so it figured out it was 320. So that's how you just do scale by one dimension. Now the other trick, and this is where we start to get into internal variables inside of FFmpeg, there is an internal variable called IW and IH, and that stands for input width and input height. Now this is where you can sort of do some really, really cool stuff in other places. Because it knows the internal width and internal height, you can start to do things with this. So in this case, instead of saying I have a fixed dimension I want to match it to, you can say I just want a video that's half the size of my previous one, right? So all we're doing here is for the width, we're just going to say take the input width and multiply it by 0.5, so divide it in half. I believe you can also do this. Divide by 2 also works. I just tend to think in percentages, so this is what I do. And then at the same point, do the input height at the same dimension. And this will just, you run this cell and it will just generate a 50% smaller video. So those are the two ways to change the aspect ratio. Now, if you, or sorry, to keep the aspect ratio but change the scale. Now, if you want to change the aspect ratio, you can do the same thing. What you want to do is you want to add this command that says set SAR. And SAR is something like something aspect ratio. I forget exactly what the S stands for. This is going to change your aspect ratio to match these dimensions. So if you were to actually keep this out, I believe what happens is it takes the first dimension and automatically changes the second dimension to match whatever it is to keep the aspect ratio. So you actually have to tell FFmpeg, I want to change the aspect ratio to do this. So you can run this and we can just see what this video is. So you're going to see it just stretched it. Now, obviously, anytime you stretch things, you want to think about like, do I have the pixels to stretch them? Is it going to get blurry? That sort of thing. But you can play with this and do some interesting things with it. All right, so that is scaling. So
Wait,
go for it. Yeah.
What with set SAR, are you equals 1? Is 1 just a flag for true?
That's a good question. Let's look at the documentation. I believe that's saying like the pixel dimensions are this, but let's look. So this is a common thing is like you might just want to look at the documentation and say, let's look up scale. Whoops, scale. Let's try this again. Come on. My computer is not happy with trying to read this long page. Let's just look up SAR.
It's fine. I didn't want to derail.
Yeah, no. But we can look this up a little bit later and figure this out. But yeah, I think in the documentation it sort of says what exactly it does with SAR. I just know that that's the trick to get this to work, because if you don't set this, it will just, for whatever reason, it'll just skip whatever you ask for and just give you a, it'll keep the aspect ratio.
I guess because I don't understand why on the previous line you did scale equals IW times 0.5 and IH times 2. Like
That actually is, oh, sorry, that was probably just a mistake on my part. But again,
Okay.
I didn't run this, but I would guess that if I did do this, that it would just actually like output the correct aspect ratio. Let's see.
Okay. That's why I was wondering. It seemed like you almost have to set a flag to violate the aspect ratio, which is interesting.
Or it actually throws an error, maybe. Let's see.
I ran it and it seemed to work fine. It might be because it's relative,
Yeah.
because you're forcing it that way.
Oh, sorry, my path is wrong here, I think. Let's see. It's possible that you just can't. Yeah, it seems like it threw an error for me. Was it 0.2 before, or was it just 2? I can't
Just
remember.
two.
Okay, interesting. Huh. Well, regardless, this probably isn't what you want to do, so don't do it that way. But yeah, I do think that you have to set this flag to actually like stretch the dimensions. Okay, so let's look at rotate. Rotate is actually kind of a funny thing because there's a bunch of default rotations, because obviously, like for most people, you don't want to rotate video in a weird dimension, because how does it crop? What do you do with it? So FFmpeg by default has a bunch of like rotations that are purely just like 90 degrees with some flips and things. So for this one, you'll use the transpose video filter. So it just takes in transpose, and then it takes in a number, and that number corresponds to these 4 options, which I think are kind of funny. I'm not sure why it is like this, but I'm sure there's some rationale for this. So you take in the transpose filter. A 0 is rotate 90 degrees counterclockwise and flip vertically. I don't know what that does. I think most people probably want to do the 1, which is just rotate by 90 degrees clockwise. So the funny thing about this is that to do more than 1, you actually just run the filter twice. So if you want to do a 180 rotation, you actually just say transpose equals 1, comma, transpose equals 1. So it does 90 and then does 90. My guess is that it doesn't actually do 90 and then 90. It just reads these as one command and like multiplies them. So it probably just does 180. So in this case, you can combine these. So there's also a counterclockwise. So sort of like if you wanted to do rotation of 1, 90 degrees clockwise, it's 1. And if you want to do the opposite, it's 2. So we'll look more next week at how to actually do like rotation based on like an actual angle, because that is kind of a fun thing to do, especially in art practices. But since FFmpeg is built so much for people not to do artistic things with it, they have this default transpose. So you can play with this. This is going to be a cool thing maybe you want to utilize in the homework, which I will get to in just a minute. But yeah, so we'll look at rotation a little bit more next week as well. And lastly, the last thing I want to cover for this is cropping. So cropping is pretty straightforward. You use the video filter again. and then use the crop command. And these four parameters correspond to the width, the height, and then the top and then the left position of where you're going to be cropping from. The first command is, let's say you have a video and you want to crop just from the center, or like, I guess, like you want to take a small crop of that. Like, let's say I know my video is 512 or 1024 by 1024. So let's say I want to take the top left corner of that. So we're going to take the width will be 512, the height will be 512, and we're just going to take that from the top left corner. So for those of you who are coordinate conscious, FFMPEG considers the top left to be 0, 0. So it's top left is 0, 0 all the way down to height and width. And you can also use input width and input height here. So if you wanted to move this over, you could say input width. Like actually, let's say we want to make this smaller. So 256, 256. And let's say I want that bottom right corner of the video. What you could do is you could say input width minus, I guess, what's 1024 minus, what is that? We could do input width minus 768, and then input height minus 768. That's going to be the bottom corner. Sorry, I rushed through that. If you're interested in coordinate stuff, you can play with this a little bit. Oh, interesting. FF play. Does that work in Colab, Sarah?
I do not know that.
Yeah.
I haven't tried it in
My
Colab.
guess is my guess is
but
it
yeah,
won't,
in your command line, it'll let you do it. So if you're trying to get it pixel correct, I end up doing that a lot to like figure out my crop values if I've done something stupid.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, I don't think that'll work in Colab, unfortunately, because there's no buffer to play to. But yeah, that's a good thing to know about when you want to do that in the terminal. Cool.
I'll paste it in Slack in case people want to see it later.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so we can run this and we'll just get a crop of our video. And I also think one of the funny things is that if you mess up these dimensions, I think the numbers overflow. I haven't really played with that in a while, but I believe that it just sort of like loops back on itself. So if you do have like if you're like asking for more than exists, I think it will actually like loop back. That's something we can play with over the next couple weeks because that feels like a fun video art kind of thing to look at. So if I download this video and look at cropped, go to download. I don't think that's right. Maybe I did my math wrong. Yeah, it doesn't look like the bottom corner. Okay, so I'll have to look at this. But either way, let's just take the top corner to make sure that I'm right here. Take that.
Will that take in division with the IW? Like, did you do IW divided by 2?
You can, yes. And actually by default, I believe it defaults to the center of your value. I was actually I was trying to find that here before. So if we do crop. This is again where looking at the documentation is helpful because it does sort of decide. So you can sort of see the X and Y positions are, again, the default value. And what you'll see here is there's also a variable for out. So it'll take those first two dimensions and also be able to apply that. So the default is actually cropped directly from the center. So you'll see that the value here is take your input width, subtract your output width, and divide by 2. So it'll actually crop directly from the center. So it's kind of helpful to know. So there's also a keep aspect ratio here. There's a bunch of values for cropping. So there's a bunch of things you could look at. There's also, we'll talk about this a lot more next week. You can take in the timestamp. So if you actually want to move your crop, you can use T, and that will give you the exact position of the crop. We'll look at that a lot more next week. This is where we get into really fun things like being able to use time to actually manipulate values. But I highly recommend for any of these video filters that you look up the documentation by just going to the all.html page and searching for the video filter, and then you can look it up. because you'll find that there's stuff I haven't really covered yet, and we'll probably cover more of this over the next couple weeks, but it's also maybe something you want to play with during the week off. It says cropping. So we've got about 10 minutes left, so I wanted to show sort of like maybe a fun little example of something I've done in the past, which is a gridded layout. And actually, if you saw the demo video for this class, this is actually what I used for this. So it's just using a bunch of cropping tools, and then we're going to recombine all of our crops into sort of a grid. So let's take a look at this. And also, we're doing this the dumb way this week, and next week we'll be looking at the cool way to do this. So if you're like, this is kind of annoying, I don't want to do this, then next week we'll make this easier. So don't worry about that. So let's think about how we want to do a gridded layout. So for this, I'm just going to do a really basic thing. I'm going to take my video and I'm going to break it into 4 pieces. So I'll do the top left, the top right, bottom left, bottom right. That's probably reversed for you. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're just going to take in our video and we're just going to crop. So we'll do, so this is going to be, let's take the input width and divide it by 2, right? So we'll take our video and we'll just say like, we want half of that. And then we'll take the input height and do the same. And then we need to give some positions to our crop. So we'll start at 0, 0, and we'll take a crop there. So that's gonna be the top left. And then the next dimension will be, we'll move over half the width and we'll take a crop there. So that'll be the top right. And then we'll do, again, the bottom left and bottom right. And so I've saved, I'm going to run this command. It'll run FFmpeg 4 times, and it will save out a video called crop 0, crop 1, crop 2, and crop 3. So we'll run this cell. And one cool little thing about Colab is it'll show you where you are in the process. So the green arrow is here, so we're going to process our first video, then we're going to process our second video all the way down. So we've got crop 0, crop 1, crop 2, and crop 3. And for a fun thing, what we're going to do is we're going to take our our second video. So I guess this is actually, how do I name these? Yeah, we'll take our second video. So we're going to take our top right, and we're going to rotate that 180 degrees. So we're going to take our input of crop 1. We're going to use those 2 transpose features to rotate it 90 and 90. And then we're going to save it out again as crop 1. -y just says overwrite the file. So if you remove this, it'll basically say like, hey, that file already exists. Do you want me to overwrite it? In Colab, you just like click in this space and hit yes, and or hit Y and then return, and that'll overwrite it. It's easier to just say like -y to just sort of like override all that command. So if you do that, it'll just rotate it. So now I have one video that's I've got everything broken up into a grid, and then I've rotated one of my videos. So now I'm going to cheat a little bit. I'm going to show you a cool complex filter called HStack and VStack. HStack is, maybe as you would understand, it takes multiple videos in and it horizontally stacks them, right? So it stacks them this way. And so what we're going to do is I'm going to take in my videos and I'm going to, you'll see here I use 4 inputs. So I'm passing all 4 videos in as inputs. Now, if this is a little confusing, don't worry about this. We're going to go way more into this next week when we look at complex filters. But what we're going to do is we're going to take the video from each of those inputs and we're going to apply that to our HStack. So we're going to take video 0, which is this one, video 2, the second video, these are 0 indexed, right? So it'll be the second video. And we're going to apply those in an HStack. So we'll stack them side by side. Then we're going to take the next video, so videos index 2 and index 3, and we're also going to stack them. So we've got a video strip here and a video strip here, and then we're going to stack those 2 using a VStack. And so basically what you'll see here is we're taking in video, we're stacking them, and then we're saving them out to a variable called top. And then we're taking in 2 videos, we're not really stacking them, we're setting them side by side and saving that to a thing called bottom. and then we're taking top and bottom, and we're stacking them into a VStack, and then we are outputting them to a file called grid-2.2x2. This is a 2x2 grid. So let's go ahead and run this and take a look at what we're doing. Okay, so that produced a video. So let's see what we got. Oh, sorry. One thing I should have mentioned is I've changed the input order, right? So if you were to do crop 0, crop 1, 2, and 3, you would basically get the same video out, except your top right corner would be rotated. So input order matters here. The order in which these are set as inputs does matter, and it's important to keep that in mind. So what I've done is I've sort of like shifted the video forward one set. So when this downloads, we'll be able to take a look at it and see what happened. So Robin asked, is 0.v also a variable? Yes and no. This is basically a placeholder for a video, but you can't set this. Like this is basically a fixed constant. This will always point to this video. Now, I believe you can overwrite it if you do something like this, but that gets messy. I generally don't recommend doing that unless you really know what you're doing. But essentially, these are more placeholder. You can think about them more as placeholders for this sort of command. But you can use things like the t variable, which is the how far along in the video am I, and that can be used as a variable input. We'll look at more of that next week when we do some of these combining of things.
Okay, thanks.
So let's take a look at this video. Yeah, of course. Interesting. What happened here? I think my transpose might have been incorrect or wrong, or it broke.
Mine also broke.
Interesting. I wonder if we shouldn't have overwritten this. So let's do this. We'll rerun just this command, and we'll rebuild our top left video, or top right. Oops, what did I do here? So let's download this and make sure this video works. All right, so that works. So maybe something happened here with the transpose. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to save this out as a second file, so I always have that that one that we can go back to. So let's just save this out and see what happens here.
Yeah, it seems like it tried to rewrite itself in the middle of the operation. So like,
Yes, that works fine rotating. So let's just use this then as crop 1 dash rotate. And I wonder if there is something funky with Colab and overwriting file names. That wouldn't shock me if there's something weird going on there. So if we just use this as the rotated function and we run this again, we should get our correct video. I'm going to hit stop. And I'm actually just going to change the name of this here just to make sure that we don't have that same issue happen. Whoops, come on. Hitting that 2 hours of Zoom where my computer starts to freak out. Just add an R here. We'll run this. Okay, so while this runs, I want to quickly go over like maybe a little bit of the homework example that we could do. So this is obviously like, we've made a grid and that's cool and all, but what if we could automate this or just think about how we could functionalize this? So what I've done here below is if you know Python, this is maybe a way you can start to think about how we could begin to automate some of this work. So what this does is it says, you could provide a bunch of variables. Like let's say we want like a W count. So how many videos do we want along the side, and how many do we want along the top, right? So we can begin to break this into multiple pieces of grid. So we'll do H count and W count. So this will begin to break up our video into newer and smaller and smaller pieces. Now you might have to set some additional variables here. Like I'm noticing that like the way I've set this isn't really that flexible, right? It's 240 by this. So I'm not going to get my full video, but I will begin to generate a bunch of different crops. So this will just generate small 240 by 240 patches of my video. So what we're starting to do here, and this is important to highlight in how you can do this inside of Colab, is we're writing Python. So anything that doesn't have an exclamation point in front of it is Python. And then when we actually want to run the command line command, we add the exclamation point, and then we pass in variables using our curly braces. So you'll see I'm setting Y and X here, and then we're passing in these as curly brackets. And what that will do is it'll pass in our values to the command line command. So I know I'm running a little short on time, so maybe I'll cover this again in co-working for anyone that's interested in this. But essentially, this allows us to automate our command line script so that we can begin to do all sorts of variableized things. So this will generate a bunch of, it'll generate 3 crops down and 3 crops across. That'll be 9 total crops. And this will be throw an error because I'm going to try to overwrite my previous names. So let's do crop 2 for this. Also, this is bad if you throw an error message here while you're doing a loop. It actually, like, every time you hit stop, it like goes back and like does the next step in your loop. I kind of made a mess of this. Sorry about that. But essentially, like, we can start to combine Python and FFmpeg, and we'll cover a little bit more of this next week. Actually, maybe I'll just go through this cell again early next week for people that are interested in this. So if you're not like a strong Python person, what I might recommend is just play with these cells, right? So maybe you want to produce, see if you can figure out how to produce like maybe a 4x4 grid instead of a 2x2 grid. Now, obviously this will be a lot of manual work, right? You're going to be like writing out like multiple lines of commands and sort of duplicating them. So a 4x4 grid is going to need 16 commands instead of 4. But you can do that. And then maybe you also want to play with like, okay, what if I rotate one of my videos? Or, what if I want to, let's see, what else do we look at? What if I want to scale one of my videos to be larger? How might I do that? So you can play with these sort of in like a just purely functional, like do one thing, do one thing, do one thing, and then combine them using that HStack filter. So I know I ran a little bit short on time for the second half of this. So if anyone does want to go over sort of this particular task in more detail, we'll set up a co-working session so we can go over those. But I think this will be the start of just going to like get our feet wet and producing some FFmpeg videos. Next week, we will look at how to make this a lot easier for ourselves, or kind of sort of easier for ourselves using complex filters. But I think this will be the start of something fun. And also, don't be afraid to use multiple videos, right? So for now, I've used the exact same video as my input. What if you were to take maybe 3 or 4 videos and change out the inputs? So you're almost making like a checkerboard of different video files. We can start to play with that. And also feel free to, like, if you use After Effects or other things, like open one up in After Effects and change the color of it and then save it out, right? We'll look at more of this as we get further into the class, but like, don't be afraid to like play with stuff outside of FFmpeg to get cool new inputs for this. So that's pretty much your homework, is just play with this. I would also say, like, if you want to dig around in some of the documentation, maybe you're like, how do I blur something? And you search for blur, and you can find a blur filter or something. So play with those. A lot of this stuff we will cover next week as we go through and add more and more to our repertoire of these filters and things. But if there's something that you want to play with ahead of time, like, please feel free to try. And if you can't get it working, like, drop a note in Slack, and I'll either say, hey, we'll do that next week, so wait a week, or I'll try to help you in the class as we go through it. But I think this will just be a fun starter to just play with some cropping filters and manipulating those and stacking them together. Any questions before we call it a day?
I'm getting an error that says your input can't be opened by VLC, and like when I look at it, it's like a file format that's, what is it? It's like IPYNB.
Oh, that's a Python notebook. So I think I don't know what you did, but maybe you saved down the notebook. Like maybe you hit save here. So IPYNB is the notebook that you will upload and use in Colab.
Right.
If you're trying to produce a video file, you should get a video.
I did.
So you should just be able to click on one of these and hit download.
I did.
I wonder if some of the issues that we're hitting with this like reading of things is that it's somehow during Python. Interesting. What were you trying to do, if I can ask?
I did the let's put it all together gridded layout, and
Okay.
then I did the hang on, let me just look. Combine 9 videos together. I mean, I think I got one of the gridded things out fine,
Okay.
but then when I did the 9 together, I get this problem, and it says it's an MP4 in the files, and I download it from there. But when it arrives, and it might be a Windows thing because I'm doing this on a Windows machine. I don't know.
Yeah, interesting. I wonder what would be happening there. Okay, so I unfortunately have to run, but what I would do is I would try maybe deleting all of your video files from here and just rerunning these cells again, because it's possible that maybe what happens is with this overwriting issue, we're running into a thing where it's somehow saving them as a weird file format, like this YNB thing. So if you start from scratch, sometimes like that's a helpful way just to make sure that like you're not overwriting files in a weird way. But I'd say if you are still getting those issues, just drop me a note in Slack, and maybe Dania, I know you're running into the same issue, so maybe we can try to like debug it later today. Cool. Okay. All right. Well, hopefully, if other people run into this issue, let me know, and we can try to debug. I'll try to debug this stuff tonight for folks, and we can try to figure out what's going on there. But otherwise, I hope you had a good first week. Next week, we'll start to look at more stuff and have more fun with things. But I would definitely recommend running through the notebook again and just sort of getting yourself settled with sort of like using this process and getting used to sort of the format of things. And I'll drop a note in the Slack channel and probably email folks as well when we've got a co-working time set up, so that hopefully people can join us for that as well.
Thanks, Derek.
Cool. All right. Thanks, everybody. And
Thank
I'll post
you.
I'll post the recording later this afternoon as well.
Nice one. Thank you.
Okay. Bye, everybody.